Hey everybody, Neil Malik from Knack Training here, bringing another everyday office video. And in today's video, I'm going to demonstrate how using Power Query and Power Pivot together can give you an absolutely incredible amount of power by creating a calendar table that allows us to differentiate dynamically between the future and the past, or between regular quarters of the year and your actual fiscal quarters of the year. There are lots and lots of different date combinations that could be valuable to you, and we're going to be addressing a lot of them in this video. The idea here is that we're starting off with data in different tables, and this could be an Excel, it could be a CSV file, it could be a database, it could be wherever. You notice here I have a contracts table in this spreadsheet. I have a training events table in this spreadsheet, and both contracts and training events pertain to dates. That makes sense, right? And then I have this other table that is the simplest thing you've ever seen in your life. It's literally just a whole bunch of dates. Now, there are different ways of constructing this, but all I did was started in cell B2. I picked a random date in the past of 1/1/2005, and I auto-filled it down until I got to, was it 2030? Yeah, somewhere in 2030. I figured that was far enough in the future, but I could keep going for as long as I felt like. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use two tools together. I'm going to use Power Query and I'm going to use Power Pivot. And it's going to allow me to set something up that I can reuse over and over and over again. But I'm not going to do it in this spreadsheet. So I'm going to close this down and I'm going to start from a blank spreadsheet. And what I'm doing right now is building a template. So you can see here a blank sheet of paper. I've got my data tab at the top of the screen, and I'm going to query my calendar table. So go to data, go to get data from file, grab it from an Excel workbook, and I happen to have my calendar table right there. So I'm going to query this. It's going to come into Power Query. There's my dates right there. I'll click on Transform Data. And I'm going to do some other things with this, but for right now, let's think through what this needs to be. I only need date information when it comes to the other tables, right? Dates are only pertinent to the training events or to the contracts or to when we hired people or all that other stuff. These dates by themselves don't mean anything. So I am not going to click on Close and Load. I'm instead going to do this. I'm going to go to Close and Load to, and I'm going to make this a connection that is loaded into the data model of this spreadsheet. So I'm preparing the data model, which is code word for Power Pivot, with a bunch of dates. And other things in just a second, but with just a bunch of dates. And that's going to allow me to create files that are then connected to other data sets and use those dates. So I click OK, and I'm not quite there yet because right now that calendar table is literally just dates. So let's go back to Queries and Connections on the right-hand side here, double click on it, and get to work. Because it's here where doing work up front is going to save us time and energy later and give us really superpowers to work with. Because we can go to the actual date column here and we can calculate tons of things that are of use to us. So I can go to Add Column up at the top of the screen, and using the Date drop-down menu, for example, I can come in here and I can say, you know, I need to know what the year is. I'd like to be able to just look at the year by itself. Or again, clicking on Actual Date, I'd like to go to the Date drop-down menu, and I'd like to output the number of the month, perhaps. There's the number of the month. Let me rewrite this as month number. Or, again, if I go back to that original date, I can output the name of the month, like that. So I can call this month name. Or I can go back to that actual date and I can output the quarter. Or I can go back to that actual date and output the week, maybe the week of the year. Or I can go back to that and figure out what the day of the week is, the name of the day, for example. Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. And then I can go even further with it. So I can do things like, well, if I know what the month name is, and I know what the year is, I can use those two pieces of information. And I'm going to go up here and click on column from examples. And I'm going to type in Jan space 2005 and hit enter. And then Jan 2005. And at some point, you can see right here, it says, okay, I think what you're doing is you're typing in the word Jan and then a space and then grabbing the year. Well, that's not exactly what I'm doing. So I'm going to go down here somewhere where the month is February. I'm going to type in Feb 2005. And just like that, it goes, oh, I get it. So what you're doing is you're going to the date, and we're pulling out the abbreviation of the month from that, and we're also pulling out the year from that, and we're pulling that into this custom column. So I'll hit OK here, and now I'll call this mon-year, something like that. That's good. So we can use that information. Or, for instance, with quarter, we could very easily go in here and add a new column that's just Q1. And then right down here, when we get to Q2, right here, we type in Q2, and it will pick up that we're taking the letter Q and putting it in front of the number from the quarter value. So we hit OK. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to call this Q number, something along those lines. So I have the actual quarter, I have the Q number, I have the week of the year, the day name, the month and year abbreviation. All those are good. But what if now we have something we need to derive from what we've already got? So for example, here's a good one. I have the days of the week, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, but what if what was really useful to me was weekends versus weekdays? Ooh, okay. Well, I could get that because Saturdays and Sundays are weekends, right? So I can take this, add a custom column up here, and I can add some logic that says, is it a Saturday or Sunday? Click on custom column. I'm going to call this weekend weekday and use an if statement. Okay, so if the day name is equal to Saturday, or if the day name is equal to Sunday, then we want to output that it's a weekend. And if it's not, else we want to output it's a weekday. Oops, there we go. Hit OK. And now we have weekends versus weekdays. I can make sure that that is text right there. Or another example, I was in a class with Mr. Excel last month, and something that came up during class was, what if my fiscal year doesn't match up with the actual year? Oh, okay. Well, in her case, the fiscal year ended on June 30th and started up on July 1st. So that's relatively easy. We can say, well, we need the month number, right? If the month number is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6, then the fiscal year is actually the previous year. And if it's 7, 8, 9, or 10, or 11, or 12, it's the current year. So again, we can use some logic, right? We can go to custom column up here. We can call this column fiscal year. And we could say if the month number is, let's say if it's less than 7, okay? If it's less than 7, meaning it's 1 through 6, then what we need to do is we need to take the year and subtract 1 from it. Otherwise, just output what the actual year is. So that's the fiscal year. Okay, great. Fiscal year, perfect. That's awesome. But what if now we're interested in the fiscal quarter, right? Because The quarter, 1, 2, 3, or 4, Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4, that's based on a year that starts in January. Oh, okay, so what it actually means now is that the months 1 through 3 are actually the third quarter, and 4 through 6 are actually the second quarter. Again, we can use logic for this. So we can go to custom column, and we'll call this the fiscal quarter. And we'll say if the month number is less than 4, then we're outputting Q3. Otherwise, if the month number is less than 7, then we'll output Q4. Else, if the month number is less than 10, then we'll output Q1. And lastly, we'll output Q2. Oh, forgot my if right there at the beginning. There we go. So there you can see if the month number is less than 4, do this. If it's less than 7, do this. If it's less than 10, do this. Otherwise, do that. Hit OK. And now we have the fiscal quarter. And again, that's text. So you can see here how fiscal quarter and fiscal year might be more important to us than the actual year or the actual quarter is. And the weekend might be more valuable to us than whether it's a Monday or a Tuesday. And this abbreviation might make it easier on people to figure things out. And we might then also take fiscal quarter and fiscal year, for example, go up here to add column and add a merged column where we take these two and we put a space in between them, and we call this fiscal year quarter. Let's say fiscal year quarter, something like that, and hit OK. And now we have the information of Q3 of 2004 for the fiscal year quarter instead of the actual year and actual quarter. And then this is one that I got from Avi Singh. What about past versus future? Couldn't that be helpful? Oh, absolutely. Now, in order to do that, I'm going to go ahead and bring up a little bit of information from the Power Query reference on Microsoft's website. So I'll put a link to this in the description. You can see here how there are lots and lots and lots of what are called M functions that are available to us in Power Query. And one of them is called datetime.local now, and that outputs what the current date and time is. But what's interesting about this is that it's going to create an error in the instance right here where my actual date is formatted purely as a date and not as a date time. So I'm going to need to do two things, and that is I'm going to need to use datetime.date basically to trim the time part off of the date for me. And that's what we're going for. So right here, I'm going to calculate whether something is in the past or it's in the future using this actual date. So add column, custom column. I'll call this past future. And again, it's an if statement, right? So if the actual date is less than, and now we need to know what today is, right? So once again, that's datetime dot date, open parentheses, datetime dot local now, open close parentheses, close parentheses. So that is how you output just the date part of today's date. Then we'll call this the past. Otherwise, we'll call it the future. And when we click OK, now we have a past versus future column. And all of this is just the preamble, the setup work to how we're going to use this for other sets of data. So now watch what we do here. I go back up to the Home tab, hit Close and Load, and that's now just part of this spreadsheet. And I'm going to go to the File tab in the top left-hand corner, and I'm going to choose Save As so that I can save this file as a template file, an Excel template, .xltx. Now I'm going to go ahead and save this to the spot where my original file was, so you can see this more easily. We'll call this template with calendar. Okay, and I'll close that off. And now let's look at my folder system. I've got this template file here called template with calendar. You can see it's different because it has the binding at the top like a notepad would. And I can double click on this to open up a new copy of the spreadsheet anytime I like. So here is template with calendar 1. I'll go to File, Save As. I'll save it back to that same location, and I'll call this, let's call this Contract Analysis. And now enable the external content, and let's go to the Data tab to get data and launch the Power Query Editor, and that calendar that we have should be sitting in here ready to go. All the work that we just put in is going to pay off dividends now. So I said that this was the spreadsheet for contract analysis. I'm going to now go to New Source up here at the top, go to File, and pull in the data from the contracts. Now I'm feeling pretty good about this data coming in, so I'll click OK, and I'll simply do what I did in the previous example. I'll click on Close and load that to only a connection, and load it to the data model, and click OK. Now I have two sets of data in the data model, the calendar and the contracts. And I can go to my Power Pivot tab at the top of the screen and go into the data model. So now we're shifting from Power Query to Power Pivot, and we're using Power Pivot to establish that the calendar and the contracts are related to one another. I click on Manage. That opens up Power Pivot, and you can see both the calendar table and the contracts table. I'm going to go to my Diagram View button at the top of the screen and establish that there's a connection between the actual date on the calendar and the contract date that's in this contract table. I simply click and drag between those to establish that there's a connection. And now, because there's a connection between these two, I can create a pivot table from this data. I'll make it in the existing worksheet in that cell right there. And I can put in the data about the contracts very easily. So for example, I could say, put in the yearly value of the contracts. I can decide to format that so that it looks nice. I'll call this total contract value. Looking good. And I can do things like break it down by region, for example, or break it down by client type, or by client. But I can also break it down now, because I've used Power Pivot, by anything that's in the calendar table. So I can break it down, for example, by taking fiscal year and putting it into the rows field, and now I can see the contract value for fiscal year 2020, not the actual year 2020, but the fiscal year 2020. Or if I want to see this by whether it's a weekend or weekday, there's my contract values for things that were signed on weekdays versus weekends. Or if I want to see based on month and year, again, I can see all of those different characteristics. And I can also use it for filtering purposes. So let's say, for example, I wanted to show this by region. So I have now region and yearly value from the contracts table in my pivot table. But now I can go up to my Pivot Table Analyze tab at the top of the screen and insert a slicer and slice this by anything that's in the calendar table. So I could say, for example, show me anything in a specific fiscal quarter and anything in a specific fiscal year. So I'll click OK here, and now I might be interested in, let's say, 2017, hold down the Shift key through 2021, that is being done in Q1 or Q2. And of course, because we're using the fiscal quarter and the fiscal year, we're talking about July through December of 2017 through 2021. And what's really great here is that I can use this exact same principle to analyze new information as well. Let's pull that folder back up. I go back to that template that I just created earlier. I double click on it, and I'm starting off yet again with a blank spreadsheet that has a connection to the calendar. I can go to my Data tab at the top of the screen, click on Get Data, and launch my Power Query Editor. And this is a blank workbook that, again, has that calendar table in it that I set up ahead of time. And now I'll go into New Source, pull in the data from an Excel file, and this time around, pull in the data about training events. So here's all of my training events, past and future. I hit OK, and remember, I'm not really doing anything where I dump this out onto the spreadsheet. So I click Close and Load to, and I make this a connection to the data, and I add it to the data model so that Power Pivot can leverage this thing that I've brought in. Click OK. And once again, go to my Power Pivot tab at the top of the screen, click on Manage, and I see both my calendar table and my training events table. I can go to my diagram view, establish that there is a connection between the start date of every training event and the actual dates that are on the calendar, like so. Then click on Pivot Table and analyze the information that's in my training events table. So for example, I might be interested in just how many events are we talking about, right? So I might take something like event ID and put it in the values box so it counts up how many events we're talking about. So there's 143 events right here. Let me take a second here, go to my value field settings, and I'll call this number of events. Great, so 143 events. Now, if I go to my calendar, I could be concerned with each of the individual fiscal years and quarters. So I can put that in the rows field, and I can see that for every quarter and every year that I have analysis of when these different events are happening. And I can see that there is a big spike in Q1, fiscal year Q1 of 2021. 11 events are being held between July and September of 2021. That's a big deal. Or I can take that information out and I can break it down to simply whether it's happening in the past or whether it's happening in the future. So we have 39 events in our past, 104 events in our future. And because we've taken the time to build out the calendar table and save it into a template, we have the ability to analyze whether it's training events, contracts, or any other piece of information, things based on past versus future, fiscal years, weekends versus weekdays, or anything else that we can imagine.